Okay, I will start with a few introductions and intros here, and then I will pass it over to Holly and Matt. So, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Zabel. I'm the program manager here with WBFI. I want to welcome you all to our webinar sponsored by BirdFeed on the joy of bird feeding basics and beyond. We have our two experts with us today, Matt Young and Holly Merker. Before we dive in, I have just a few things to keep in mind. We are in a meeting setting here on Zoom, so to try to keep your audio off and your camera off would be great too, just so that we can make sure that Holly and Matt are highlighted for everybody. If you have questions, you can raise your hand if you want to, and then we'll call on you, and you're welcome to turn your microphone and video on at that point to ask your question to have a little bit of interaction. Otherwise, you can also use the chat feature, and we'll be monitoring the chat throughout as well. Um, I will have a few intros here and then we'll get started. So first we want to thank our sponsor, BirdFee, for sponsoring this webinar today and coordinating our esteemed speakers. BirdFee is a smart birding brand dedicated to making bird watching fun, easy, and accessible for everyone. BirdFee combines AI-powered cameras with smart home technology to provide products such as bird feeders, bird houses, and bird baths. I'd now like to welcome our two experts. First, Holly Merker is a professional birding guide, writer, and educator with a background in art therapy who now specializes in delivering nature-based wellness programs with birds at the heart of her work. Holly co-authored two books with guide readers into optimizing which guide readers into optimizing the wellness benefits birds provide us, including the award-winning Ornitherapy for Your Mind, Body, and Soul. She is also co-host and co-producer of the Mindful Birding podcast and is the founder of the Mindful Birding Network. She serves as a trustee on WBFI's Research Foundation and is a consultant and brand ambassador for BirdVie. Our second expert joining us today is Matt Young. Matt is author of Finches of North America with Lillian Stokes, and he is the president and founder of the Finch Research Network. He worked at the Cornell Lab across 15 plus years, where he did extensive field work for the lab's cerulean and golden-winged warblers atlas projects, and was project lead on the lab's first Finch eruptive bird survey for BirdSource in 1999. He was the collections management leader, audio engineer at the Macaulay Library for about 12 years, where he edited sounds for several Merlin packs. So, welcome you both today. I will pass it over to you and turn my camera and audio off as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Rebecca. We're thrilled to be here today. Matt and I are both passionate about this subject, the joy of bird feeding, the basics and beyond.
Yeah, we're thrilled to be here, and it's always great to talk our passions with whoever will join us.
So, as you all know, bird feeding, it fills us up. It fills us with joy, and there's so many wonderful moments. But is there something more in it for us beyond just that enjoyment that we feel when we're connecting to birds that come into our feed? Well, I have to say, this is really cool. So, first off, say hello to Mr. Cardinal that is at my bird feed feeder in my backyard just a couple weeks ago. The fact is that wild bird feeding is absolutely trending right now, and perhaps you have even recently in the last week seen in the news these reels. So it is really thrilling to see birding and bird feeding spotlighted by shows like the Today Show, where they're talking about some emerging research, and there's many different projects now and researchers looking at the impact of how good bird feeding is for our personal well-being. And so last week you may have seen where they were talking about bird feeding as a new hobby and how the study that they were referencing could improve our attention and our perception and even change our neuroplasticity. And the best part of all was hearing Al Roker talking about his bird feeder camera. And so this is what I mean by trending.
Yeah, and it's not just Al. I mean, here's James Hetfield from Metallica saying, "Oh, now all the cool kids are doing it." So he admits he's obsessed with bird watching, and he has 6 bird feeders up. I actually have 35 bird feeders up, which is even more obsessive than James. But just wanted at least, put a shout out to James there that he also is in on this, and he's certainly one of the cool kids.
Absolutely. So fun. And we know that birding and bird watching can lower our stress and even offset anxiety. And it was a really wonderful thing to have the AARP, excuse me, reach out to me a couple of months ago and ask me to talk a little bit about the calming effects of birds and bird feeding, bird watching. And so when we have major news media looking at these aspects of wild bird feeding, it's really good for us, but it's also good for the birds. But the fact is that we all need birds and nature for our own overall well-being. And thousands of years ago, Hippocrates said, nature itself is the best physician. So thinking about that, how connecting to birds that are coming into your feeder, how they actually can be almost medicinal or healing or therapeutic in some way. And really, it all starts right outside your own doors.
Or outside your window. Like a couple of years ago, I took this photo of purple finches and goldfinches out my window. And, for a lot of us, when it comes to nature engagement, I mean, a lot of us just don't get even more. I mean, that's the only engagement they get for the day is to like look out at their bird feeders and see the birds at their feeders. I mean, I get out a little bit more than that. I'm sure Holly does too. I know her that she gets out a lot, but again, that backyard setting is so important for so many people.
Absolutely. Because really, when we send an invitation to birds to come into our spaces and they accept that invitation by showing up, really, it offers us so much more than just that visit and that joy. And thinking about what Matt was saying, for some people, and including me, I've had this experience where being able to connect with the birds that are coming into my bird feeders makes me feel good in a different way. And it can even offset feelings of loneliness or isolation that we might feel because the birds are paying us attention. And there's something incredibly powerful in that.
That's a beautiful lazuli bunting there in that last shot too. And so speaking of that, and this might be a little bit, this is a good friend of mine, Ryan Brady in Wisconsin, took this photo a couple of years ago, or not photo, took this video of red poles just absolutely inundating his backyard, feeding at his feeders. And he was just, every day he was mesmerized. I mean, it was estimated between 500 and 1,000 birds at his feeders, which is, not for everybody, but still, again, pretty mesmerizing seeing these northern finches come down and visit every so often. We don't get them every year. And being in Wisconsin, he was able to get this huge flock. Anybody that can pick out a siskin or a goldfinch will have a special prize for them.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
That's a good quest, everyone. Maybe you'll
I
get a free
know.
book
I don't
from
think it's
Matt for
doable
me.
though.
Yeah, no, pretty awesome.
Yeah. And, here's again, just I'm always going to plug Finch's being the founder of the Finch Research Network. And I also, work with Bird Fee and the Wild Bird Feeding Institute and their research, committee, research association. And, these are evening grosbeaks, goldfinches, and siskins here in the backyard of a feeder where they're putting some seed down on the ground. I should say Research Foundation. I just wanted to correct that. But yeah, just everybody loves what they see in their backyard, and here's some more finches that I was able to enjoy a few years back in Maine.
And it's pretty cool, Matt, because you're talking about throwing seed out. And we can do that, of course. I do that. I have many different bird feeders as well, but sometimes I just throw the seed out to make it even easier for some of those ground feeders. So it's a great example of that. But I think you have more to talk about when it comes to feeders, right?
I do. So I often give presentations with Josh Stasek at Aspen Song Wild Bird Food as well. And I'm always saying the right feeder with the right feed for the right bird. And I think that's a big thing everybody should always kind of key in on. That it's not every bird wants to go to every feeder, and not every seed or feed is appropriate for every bird. So this is a key thing, key tip to kind of keep in mind when you're setting up your backyard feeder garden.
So
And
speaking,
here are, as we often say, Boss is, black oil, sunflower seed, often drives the industry. Here you have the combination or the comparison of the two, black oil and striped. The black oil is kind of a universal seed. Almost every bird enjoys black oil sunflower seed. The stripe's a little bigger, and the bigger birds can get in them, like cardinals and evening grosbeaks. But I just want to, make that mention that really, when it comes down to the industry, the black oil sunflower seed really is the cornerstone of the industry, whether it's you're buying bags of the straights sunflower seed or you're buying mixes that actually have a variety of other seeds in it. But almost every mix you buy has some amount of black oil sunflower seed.
Yeah, my favorite type of seed to feed birds is the sunflower chips, which don't have their seed holes on there. So it's not as much mess and it's easier for the birds, especially when it's cold. They don't have to work as hard to pry that shell off of that seed.
Absolutely.
Oops. Get to the next.
And so here's one of the birds I just mentioned, evening grosbeak and like cardinal. They have a stronger bill for kind of getting into even the striped sunflower seed. But this particular bird, it actually has declined quite a bit over the last 50 years, 90%. But it is kind of rebounding some, and people can see this in their backyard in parts of the Northeast right now. They love sunflower seed. They absolutely love sunflower seed and any mix with sunflower seed. And here we kind of want to cover a variety of feeders. Like I said, right feeder with the right feed for the right bird. The bigger birds really love the platform feeders. This is a platform feeder. Also, hopper or tray feeders can be very accommodating for the larger birds. They have a hard time going to those, the port feeders, the finch port feeders. They have a very hard time kind of like perching on that and then feeding at the port they're given. In fact, sometimes, they'll perch at one port and stick their head up into another port to feed because it's just is a little bit too big or too small for them to feed at. So again, always keep in mind, the different types of feeders out there. Every bird obviously can feed at that. The platform feeder. This is kind of a tray with a cage around it, so smaller birds can kind of get in and out of it. And ideally, we'll keep squirrels kind of at bay if people want to keep squirrels at bay. But again, another type of feeder that we want to just give everybody some insight into. Here's as I said, those mixes are popular. So Finch mix uh, on this bag here with Aspen Song Wild Bird Food is a goldfinch. They really love the smaller seeds, the Niger seeds, and the canola seeds and the canary seeds and stuff like that to feed on. And not only the goldfinches, but also the red poles and siskins. So it's really the smaller finches that like that Niger or the smaller seeds. The bigger, like, you know, birds like cardinals or grosbeaks, they're really not going to go to feed on this kind of seed necessarily. And here's like just an example of what a blend could look like. This one actually has a high percentage of black oil and even some striped in there, but there's some corn in there and some other white millet in there. And we show a sparrow. This isn't necessarily indicative of the exact mix that a sparrow would love because they love white millet, but sparrows love, like, they're ground feeders in a lot of ways. And these blends have become very popular to even spread on the ground for sparrows to feed on. And here is a peanut feeder with a red-bellied woodpecker and a northern flicker, kind of dueling it out for the peanuts. There's a lot of different birds that love peanuts out there. I mean, if anybody has these up in their yard, I have four of them up in my yard. The nuthatches and the titmice and the blue jays and the woodpeckers and the chickadees as well love the peanut feeders. But you're not going to see a finch necessarily at a feeder like this. And the nectar feeders, we don't want to leave out. We're going into hummingbird season here soon. Make sure you have there's these maps out that give kind of the dates on when to have them out. I always kind of use May 1st or even like the very last days of April here in New York, where I live. But for those of you out there, you can find these maps out there that kind of give you when the hummingbirds arrive, particularly here in the east, where we just have the ruby throat hummingbird. And if you kind of put them kind of 4 feet apart, you're gonna get actually, the deal is with this, like hummingbirds can be very territorial. If you have one feeder up, they're gonna sit there and kind of like bomb all the other hummingbirds coming in. But if you kind of put two of them up, it reduces that scarcity mentality and it allows other hummingbirds to come in and feed, and you'll get a lot more hummingbirds in your backyard if you have more feeders that are kind of close to one another. And Orioles love nectar too. Um, this has become an incredibly popular part of the industry in the last, I'd say, 10, 15 years. They absolutely love the nectar. They even love more the grape jelly, which I think I have on the next slide. Um, hopefully. Yeah, so they love orange slices and grape jelly. Last year it was great. For the first time, we really worked hard here to get actually, Orioles at our feeders, and we actually was able to accomplish it last year. We had 2 pairs for a couple months, and they absolutely devoured that grape jelly and the oranges as well.
Something I saw, speaking of nectar feeders, down in southeastern Arizona one winter was an acorn woodpecker coming in and drinking it. Actually, I've seen this in a couple of places in the desert Southwest where even woodpeckers will come in and drink some of that nectar. So it's a lot of fun for those of you who live in the Southwest. You probably have a wider array of visitors at your nectar feeders.
And I should mention catbirds also love the
Ah,
grape
yeah,
jelly.
yeah.
They
It's a good
absolutely love grape jelly as well. Um, Here's bluebirds eating mealworms, again, of different types of feeders that you can provide for bluebirds, but they get in on the fun too. I know Holly has, I've
this
never
is one
seen, yeah, here we go, right
This
here.
is one of my favorite feeders that one of my friends at Wild Birds Unlimited gifted me, and I just love this. And the bluebirds love it too. So usually they're trying to compete for space in this little cup, but it doesn't take much, these little cups.
Yeah, and Holly has a lot of bluebirds actually coming into her feeders
They
in
do.
Pennsylvania. It's pretty awesome to
And
see.
they eat everything. They eat, so they'll take some of the nectar. I've seen them kind of drink from that a little bit. Also, they're coming into every style of bird feeder, including suet and including, a feeder like this one here. And then one day I was really excited because this pine warbler, which is an eastern species, was coming into my little tray feeder here that we were, it was meant for the bluebirds and their mealworms, but I was thrilled to see this male pine warbler.
And warblers are kind of unusual at feeders, but pine warbler is one, yellow rumps. There's a handful of them out there you can actually attract to your feeders with kind of a mix in the winter time. If some of them kind of winter a little bit further north. Here's kind of a variety of different suet feeders. Again, right feeder with the right feed for the right bird. I'm sure most everybody that's here in attendance today has suet up in some sort. And like I said, here's a variety of them. I know the one there that has like that almost looks like the platform or the tail. Um, Pileateds really love that one because it gives them a little extra space because it's such a bigger bird to kind of, land on it and feed on that. In fact, I actually have that feeder up in my yard. Kind of attached to a tree. But yeah, you go to the next one here, the next slide, and you have this pileated woodpecker kind of hanging at just this little kind of, square cage feeder. It's a pretty big bird for a small feeder like that. And they will go to them, obviously, as you can see here. What I do, if you do have pileateds in your yard, and there's only one house over the years that I've actually had pileateds come into my yard, and I think they really do like the feeder, the suet feeder that's like tacked into a tree because it gives them just that ability to land and maneuver on the suet. So again, just a little bit of a tip again, if you have pileatids in your neighborhood, you can get them to come into your suet feeder.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? I have one of those suet logs, which is basically a log that has holes in it, drilled in it, and I stuff the suet in there or the bark butter. And they absolutely love that for the reason you mentioned is they're a big bird and they need some support for that tail. But they also will hang upside down, which is really neat to see as well. So a lot of fun. And the fun thing about suet is it attracts such a wide variety of birds. I find in my yard there is I'm trying to think of a species that hasn't come into my suet. And, it's constantly feeding, obviously, the woodpeckers, but far more than that. And this is a photo of a black-headed grosbeak who I noticed coming into a suet cage that was just hung on some bark on a tree in California. And so we can feed birds. By the way, I keep my suet out year round. And one of the things I love about that is that in summertime and spring, the bluebirds come in and Papa Bluebird is picking off some suet to feed to the young, all lined up. I get to watch all the young being fed. Same thing with the catbirds. They come in and they feed their young. So it gives you a different perspective when you're summertime feeding your birds. And I find that suet, especially there's some types of suet that are no melt and will be easy. I mean, even I live in the Philadelphia area of US, and we can get some pretty high temperatures in summer, but my suet stays really intact. Of course, it goes quickly because the birds just love it. So,
There's also an all season, suet out there, and I should just make mention that suet feeder that the pileateds really like is often referred to as the tail prop suet feeder, and I think the one that you mentioned there, Holly, are called suet plugs, where you
ah,
just kind of put them into the tree there. But here's our friend or not friend for depending on your view on this little rascal here that everybody usually has to deal with in their backyard. Any of us in the industry, it's like, oh, they eat a lot of seeds, so they're certainly good for the industry, but they can be kind of a little bit of a nuisance at times or a pest because you don't want to necessarily feed a bunch of squirrels. But they are pretty. They're kind of acrobats, as you can see here.
yeah, we have a few more pictures of those acrobatic squirrels and also some feeder solutions that might work for you. So, this is one of my favorite bird feeders. I believe it's called the Squirrel Buster. I got it from Wild Birds Unlimited, and it's made by Brome. And I'm mentioning this just so if you're interested in looking for it, these are places you can find it. What this feeder does, and this is the feeder that attracts more species, it has the widest variety of species coming in because I mentioned everybody loves suet. But when the squirrel jumps on it, it will automatically shut. And you can see that here from this photo I took out my window just to demonstrate and prove that this feeder does indeed work. And there's a feeder behind the suet cage right there. That is another squirrel proof option. This one's called the Eliminator. It's made, again, by this company called Brome, which has really done a great job in engineering these squirrel proof feeders. And so the portals will actually close. Here's Matt's picture of the same Brome feeder.
Yeah, so there's a lot of these that they kind of call there is a specific squirrel buster feeder. I think this is actually the one, and so they're weighted when they go on and it closes the ports. But they've kind of specialized in developing manufacturing these feeders that offer some squirrel resistance. And there's a variety of different names for different feeders that actually help us stay ahead of these acrobats in our backyard.
It's a really good way of putting it because look at this guy. He's just really trying to get to that seed so hard, but he can't do it. So, really love. I think about the genius behind these people, these engineers, because it's like somebody that loves birds and they're looking out their window and they're fed up with squirrels and they come up with these concepts of ways in which to deter the squirrel. So, I'm sure it was a fun puzzle for them to solve, but we're grateful because it really does help with squirrel management in the yard.
And they can be fun to watch
Yeah, they
squirrels. I
are.
mean, they can be. I mean, I always call it kind of the Ralph because I have a setup in my yard, and there's not many of that the squirrels can get at. But there's some areas where I've actually seen squirrels at, and I'm like, how the heck did that one do that? And there's a certain amount of respect you can build, even with some of the ones that figure this out, because it really does come down to like. how strong and how acrobatic an individual squirrel, and that varies from, squirrel to squirrel to squirrel. And like I said, they eat a lot of seed, and they certainly we sell a lot of seed from squirrels eating. So again, feeding finches, I've kind of mentioned this right feeder, right seed, or right feeder, right feed. Is a big, big part of what we just want to try to get across to people today. As I mentioned there, you kind of see a couple different tube feeders. The one on the right there with the goldfinches kind of has the little slits for the smaller seed, like Niger. The one in the middle with the purple finches, they're going to feed on the bigger seeds, and those ports are bigger for birds to get on. There's also a Niger sock there, which has become popular over the last, 15, 20 years. And then the one on the far right or far left with the orange top is kind of a small, what we'd call small hopper feeder. And there's also a hanging tray there. So there's a nice variety in here. We just also want to make sure it's super, super important. Make sure you're, watching what, as you're engaging with nature in your yard and you're reducing that anxiety, just, keep an eye on them. Just make sure there's, you're not seeing any kind of like disease with birds. Make sure the feeders are clean. You want to make sure the feeders are far enough from the way from the window that they're not hitting the window. And if you do have that problem, there are a number of things that you could put decals up, feather friendly and other companies out there specialize in putting certain things on the window that can help deter window strikes.
Hey, Matt, speaking of that, whoops, before we move on, and we're talking about you were talking about disease. So, a lot of people have been talking about the avian flu. And of course, we're hearing different information. So, is it still safe to feed our birds coming into our feeders? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it for anybody that's kind of concerned about it, avian flu's been mainly just found in like waterfowl and raptors that feed on waterfowl. So they're generally not birds that are coming to your feeder where avian flu is going to be a big concern at all. So there really isn't much of a concern I see. It's certainly something that's worth watching, and that's why, people like Holly and I and others out there are involved with the Research Foundation and WBFI. We're always trying to stay ahead of this and keep people informed as best we can. And in fact, on the Finch Research Network website, we actually have a page dedicated to some of this stuff as well. So.
Oh, excellent. We'll have to put a link into the chat for those of you who are interested in learning more about avian flu and reading what Matt was sharing on the Finch Research Network website.
And you could Google, and there's a lot of information out there, but I know it's kind of hard to disseminate or figure out what is kind of accurate, what isn't accurate. Here's a feeder cam. These have become quite popular for people in recent years. This is a feeder cam it's collaborative with the Finch Research Network.
Oops.
If you could just go back
Yep,
there,
sorry
Finch
about that.
Research. No, you're all right. And Aspen Song Wild Bird Food and SUNY ESF, which is the Environmental Science department, or I should say school, that's on the same campus of Syracuse University in the Adirondacks. It's the Newcomb campus. This is a bunch of evening grosbeaks at that feeder cam that is co-sponsored by the various partners here I just mentioned in the Adirondacks. This was taken just a couple weeks ago, and this is continuing. And a lot of people find a lot of enjoyment. Like if you don't have like certain birds in your backyard, but you want to see them, see different varieties, these feeder cams that are very easy to find online. In fact, there's websites that are dedicated to kind of listing all the feeder cams out there. You can kind of, click on them and see these different birds all over the country.
Yeah, when you're talking about feeder cams, that reminds me, thinking about how birds are good for us and our mental well-being. So there are many different studies that support this idea that listening to birdsong can be calming, it can offset anxiety, and help us feel more connected to nature. And in winter, sometimes we don't have as much bird song, right? Because birds in North America stop singing in a lot of places because they're not attracting a mate, they're not defending territory. So the vocalization quality changes. And so I like to share with people that, particularly in winter, when we might be affected by the seasons and how winter can be long and kind of tough to get through, perhaps putting on one of these feeder cams so that you can hear the birds in other areas, especially those who are singing. So, and I love this idea of being able to connect to birds. This is one thing that I think is really great about the era we're living in with bird feeding is between the feeder cams and our smart bird feeder. It's like we don't have any more fear of missing out, right? So there's no more FOMO because of these ways that we can connect to the birds. And I know you want to talk about these superstars at our feeders across North America.
Yeah, so these are, two of the most common finches that people find in their backyard across much of North America. Um, the nice thing with finches is we all have kind of a garden variety finch in our backyard, no matter where we live in North America. Um, and then there's these kind of boreal ones that we don't see that often, like I mentioned with the evening grosbeak or even red poles. They're just not that common down here. But these two particular ones are often, no matter what region you kind of check on Project Feeder Watch, which is a project that Cornell has, um, they're in the top 10 across the country. And here's a feeder. This is the Duo 2. Kind of gives two angles. It gives a straight on angle, it gives a side angle. At my backyard, actually. And the nice thing here is that was a purple finch originally. That is a house finch right there that's left. The one that flew in, that's a female house finch. The one that flew in was actually a female purple finch that flew in. So it was kind of interesting to see all the different plumages there of the two different species. Not all of the different plumages, but just for anybody out there to kind of like, how do you tell them apart? On the purple finch, they have a white eye line on on the first year males and the females. This particular streaky looking bird does not have a white eye line. And we can play it again here. So male purple finch, female house finch, and a female purple comes in. And you can see that eye line on that bird as it comes in. It kind of happens fast, but that's birds for you. So pretty cool. I have both species here in my yard. I actually have more purple finches than I do house finches, which is kind of nice. But we do get both here in the yard here in Cortland, New York, and upstate New York. So
It's really neat to see your yard, Matt, and it's certainly alive with birds. And I love being able to see the behavior dynamics because it sure looked like that purple finch female or young male, the brown purple finch that came in, got scared off by the
the
house
house
finch. So,
finch, I know,
so what
I
does that
know.
say about house finches?
I don't know. I don't know. There are
Yeah.
some studies out there that house finches suggest that house finches are a little bit more dominant at feeders and might
Hmm.
be one of the reasons why purples have declined a little bit. For
Oh.
those that don't know that, we cover this in the Finches in North America, Finches United States and Canada book that I wrote with Lillian Stokes. We actually go into some of these dynamics of like how these interactions play out at feeders. So it's kind of interesting to watch, like you said, the behaviors of these birds. And like I said, this is the Bird Feed Duo 2. So there's two angles on this. We'll show you another angle.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and the house finches they're not even necessarily native to the east. If anybody didn't know that, they're a western bird and they were kind of released here in the east and then expanded. So interesting backstop. And then like let's just mention also gardening, like conservation actually takes place in your backyard, believe it or not. I know it's something that like people don't necessarily think of, but the how you set up your yard makes a big difference on some of these conservation related issues. I mean, we're helping birds in our backyard. We want to provide them with natural food, but also if we like to do supplemental food with the bird feeders, all this stuff plays into dynamics. And so that we're inviting them into the yard. We want to make sure we take care of them the best we can so they can, really be successful and succeed and reproduce and the populations are safe and for future generations. So this is actually a picture of Lillian's backyard and when she lived in New Hampshire actually, and she had planted all these natural flowers that a lot of the goldfinches and other birds love to feed on the seeds. So, provide cover. So hedgerows, bushy hedgerows, you don't need to have like manicured lawns, have brush piles at the end of your yard. But plant flowers and a lot of these birds, like there's an echinacea that the goldfinch is on right there, and the lower shot is actually either a female or a young male pine grosbeak eating crabapple or
Oops.
cherries. We're good. I think we can
No,
move it.
no, I apologize. I noticed there was a question that came into the chat that I wanted to grab, but I'm having a hard time accessing it. Well, oh, I got it. Okay, so Rebecca was asking Matt, like she has a, sorry everybody, my birds are talking here. So she has a wind tunnel in her backyard, and she's asking what feeder would you recommend that will keep the seed contained even in high winds? And that's a really good question. And she says that she does have a suet feeder, which works fine. But yeah, thinking about that, what style of bird feeder would you recommend for
That's
high
a
wind areas?
that's a great question. I would say like, oh boy. I mean, there are ways to place them where maybe they aren't as susceptible to the wind in your yard, and you could maybe look into that. But I get it. If you kind of have like some yards you can kind of set up where they're just like, you might be between two houses and there's a tunnel going through the wind. Um, I would probably suet is a great one. It's not going to blow around. That's the easiest one to kind of put up, obviously. I think, the tube feeders and, particularly those Niger socks, nothing's going to blow the seed out of the Niger socks, real. Um, and maybe like if you keep it lower, those lower tray feeders could also be a good one to provide because the higher you put things up, the more the wind's going to influence it typically. So I think if you put some tray feeders low to the ground, you can get those standing ones. I think we showed a little bit earlier. So I think a variety you could do the Niger. I think the tube feeders also are pretty good as well as far as resistant from wind. I think the hopper feeders or any kind of open platform feeder, yeah, I could just see the wind whipping through and pushing the seed right out. But if you put those kind of feeders lower to the ground, the tray feeders, I think would also work.
Yeah.
Great question, though. Not an easy
Yeah.
one necessarily.
No, it's definitely not. And it's good to think about these things when you are placing feeders or looking at which feeders to select, where you're placing them, and also what style is going to work best with whatever habitat that you have. So, and Matt and I are talking a lot about different styles of bird feeders, and of course, we both mentioned that we're both consultants for BirdFee, which create these smart bird feeder project, or well, I should say that, rephrase that again, smart bird feeding products. So it's not just bird feeding. I'll explain that in a few minutes. But one of the things that I love about that, and this is again the same feeder that Matt showed you before, I'm going to replay this video here, is this up close and personal of the behavior. So noticing this goldfinch, this is my backyard. So Matt and I are inviting you into our backyards here to watch our birds with us. And this is something that I love. I have to say, with the smart bird feeding products like BirdFee, my kids are adults now and they don't live at home, but we're all dialed into the BirdFee app. And so I get messages from my kids who are watching who's coming in at home, and it connects them to the birds at home, which they miss, even though they love the birds where they are. But also it gives us a way to connect with each other. And I've heard this repeated from so many different people about this connectivity that devices like this actually bring, and it can open up and expand an awareness. And so when you do buy one of these products, it's associated with an app, and you can watch the birds coming in. I get prompts on like my Apple Watch all the time, and I get to see who's coming in. So there's, again, I travel a lot for my work. I know Matt, you do too, and I love the birds in my yard. For me, they're like my family. I miss them terribly when I go away, so it's a great way to connect with them, but also to get to know some personalities. So
I mean,
I just
there
love.
are a lot of ways. Sorry, go ahead. No, you finish.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the personalities, like this male goldfinch, and we know it's a male, even though this was a couple of weeks ago, because of how lemon yellow his plumage is starting to molt into, and so, but notice how he's really talking to this cardinal, which is really kind of funny. And normally the cardinals sit on the rim and not with the tail there, so that was really neat because you get to appreciate that long tail of the cardinal. But I just get a kick out of the interactions and some of the behaviors that we can witness and really get to know the birds on another level.
Yeah, they're
So,
kind of coexisting there. I mean, I see a lot of times, these birds in my yard as, just pets. I mean, they're kind of companion animals. I don't have indoor pets. I have some allergies. And so I have, my birds in my yard are kind of my friends and my companions. And here you go. Here's my yard again here with the straight on look of the Duo feeder again, the Duo 2 feeder. It's a male rose-breasted grosbeak and a male purple finch. I have them year round, the purple finches, which they're not super common everywhere. But yeah, just a beautiful shot right there of the two of them. Great products. The AI is top notch compared to any other ones out there, in my opinion. But yeah, great. It's great product right there. I love that. I love that video there. You see hummingbirds in the background. You can kind of see, again, I'm big on also you can create different feeder stations if you space them for different species as well. So I have a couple different trees out in the back. Not trees, I should say they're kind of like the four pronged arms with you can hang your feeders on. Um, shepherd's hooks kind of setups. And I'll have a station with all tray feeders, and I'll have a station with all tube feeders. And then I'll have a station with just Niger socks. And then I'll have my suet kind of spread out. And I'll separate the hummingbirds, but have them close enough that hopefully that scarcity mentality, you're not going to get one hummingbird to dominate the yard as well. So you can, believe it or not, again, these are conservation issues to some extent. You can create a yard. Again, I go overboard, some would say 35 feeders. You can create setups where certain stations are even geared towards certain groups of birds, like I just mentioned. Because the tube feeders are going to attract one thing. The hopper feeders will attract everything, but not everybody can go to the tube feeders, like I mentioned earlier. The bigger birds, the jays and the cardinals and the rose-breasted grosbeaks and the evening grosbeaks, they all want to kind of go to those tray feeders. And then, like I said, the Niger socks or the Niger feeders, it's really just those smaller finches that are going to go to those. So these are a lot of different things you can kind of set up in your head when you set up a backyard. And having cover is nice too, obviously. You want to have some vegetation around so the birds, if there is a raptor around, they could kind of dive into the shrubbery and get away from a raptor.
absolutely. And we're talking about ways to invite birds in and necessities. We talked about native plants, we talked about different types of food that we can offer the birds, but also, like every other animal on the planet, birds need water. And so, thinking about that, ways in which you can invite birds in, and I'm showing you again, one of my bird feed products is a smart bird bath. And actually, not all birds come to bird feeders, but all birds need the water. So, this offers you the opportunity to see some species like warblers, like certain thrushes. You hear the noisy blue jay in my yard. And so this is what I love about it. So again, these smart bird baths, and this is actually my favorite bird feed product. Everybody at Bird Feed knows this because I could talk for hours about it. And actually, it won an innovation award at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2026 in Las Vegas, U.S. But again, it connects you to birds in a different way, a way in which that you can deepen your understanding of who they are, get to know them as individuals, and it really brings people together. Again, these concepts.
And you're
So,
increasing your diversity in your
yeah.
backyard when you have that, and there's been studies of, the higher the diversity in your yard, the more kind of like people feel better about life, believe it or not. There's actually
Yeah.
studies out there that have been
Mhm.
published that diversity can be attached or linked with like just joy and happiness.
Yeah, in fact, there's one study, Matt, that came out in 2023 by some researchers in both the US and Canada who looked at the impact of mental health admissions to hospitals. And what they found is that in areas where there were higher mental health admissions to hospitals, there was lower bird diversity. So that's an interesting correlation right there.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
for, yeah, and I thought that study and what the researchers said is these are their findings, but there needs to be more attention looking at biodiversity and thinking about biodiversity and how it impacts human wellness, like you referenced one of the studies that came out from the University of Exeter in the UK suggesting that increase in bird diversity in your yard can offset loneliness and reduce feelings of anxiety and depression, these types of things. So
I
thinking
mean, look at
about that.
COVID. I mean, well, look what happened with
Hmm.
COVID, and everybody, that was a
Absolutely.
safe thing for everybody to get outdoors. And we saw, seed sales and feeder sales and nature preserve, a number of people going to nature preserves just skyrocketed. And that's because, it was like something safe and something fun to do and made us feel good. But go ahead, Holly.
Absolutely. Oh no, and that brings up another topic, and this the idea that birds are good for us. And so both Matt and I feel really strongly about this concept. Actually, that's how we met because we connected when I was working on the ornithotherapy book, promoting the ornithotherapy book. Is because of this, we both are aligned in this thinking. We both have backgrounds in working in mental health professions, and so thinking about that and how good birds can be for you, and that's really the joy of bird feeding. And here you see Jim Carpenter, who is the founder of Wild Birds Unlimited. This is a great book that also a lot of the questions you might have that maybe we didn't cover, you could find an answer to. And then of course, Matt, your amazing book with Lillian Stokes. This literally was a cover to cover read for me, which usually guides are not. So if you open
We
the book
added
and
a lot of touches of mental health stuff. So I appreciate, it's not just your average, like, it's not a field guide. It's more than a field guide. So we're very happy with it. Thank you for the kudos there, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's such a great book. But, we really would love to hear from you all. So I'm
Yeah.
stopping my screen share here, and we invite you to ask us your questions. I know we might get some in the chat. Feel free to enter them in chat or unmute yourself and you can unmute, come on to video. We'd love to see you. So, anyway. Nat, one of the questions that we got was, what if somebody lives in an apartment? What do they do if they still want to feed birds? What are the options out there?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, if, some apartment complexes, they kind of don't love the idea of bird feeders, but, I would just, try to work with, the owners of the place and see if you could put up a feeder. Sometimes they'll allow like these little window attached feeders that you can put like the small ones that you can literally suction cup to your window. So they're not like creating an issue for the groundskeepers at the apartment complex or something like that. So,
Hmm.
that would be my suggestion there, but it's if you work with them, they'll often be all right. But this is something that Holly and I are always kind of working. I mean, it's the same thing, whether it's an apartment complex or even like sometimes these rehabilitation centers. A lot of them would really benefit. People benefit from engaging and watching birds, and it's just if you can work with them to get them to okay bird feeders, and a lot of them will actually. It's again sometimes comes down to that. Maybe you use the shellless seed, so there's not as much waste and there's not as much stuff on the ground, and so you're not going to attract the same level of like squirrels and other rodents.
Yeah, no, that's a great response. And I also advocate for hummingbird feeders in these situations because, again, like Matt said, you don't have the same problems you might with rodents or other worries. And I too use that no mess blend, which has, it's great for because I feed off my deck, and so yeah, I don't want all the waste material on the deck. So somebody else was asking about glass and glass collisions. So what are your thoughts on that? How can people help stop? Prevent window collision. So I know that plate glass is one of the biggest killers of wild birds out there.
Yeah, I mean, if someone comes down to your budget, I mean, like I mentioned, I think a little while ago, you could put these decals or dot patterns on your window that kind of give. The idea is like birds don't see, like they don't, the depth perception isn't there. So they see this space they can fly through when they see a big pane of window, and you just want to give them some level of depth perception. And that's the whole idea of putting decals and dots and stuff like that on the window so they see that there's something there and they kind of veer off. The other thing is you make sure you put them far enough away from the house, 20, 30 feet away. I know they can be a little bit harder because you're not going to see them as much. Um, but that's one of the other things you can kind of do also to kind of deter window. If you have a super, big budget, there actually is glass out there too now that you can, I know a couple people that have redone their houses with like, you know, this bird safe glass. But it's not cheap. It's not cheap. What about like, this can be I would get this from my mom all the time. My mom went through a period where she was feeding birds. She's kind of older now and she kind of has a harder time getting out there to do it. But and then I'm sure you've heard this a lot, Holly, over the years. Like, how do you deal with like a raptor that's coming into your feeder station? Um, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that could be tricky because some people don't
Yeah.
like it, and it's like, oh,
Yeah, and I'm a what I call a raptor file. I spend a lot of time monitoring raptor migration at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary and other hawk watches. So I do love those raptors, but I don't love them coming into my feeders and getting the birds really upset. But they've got to eat too. The thing is that generally, I think what you mentioned, Matt, we can't stop the hawks. I mean, this is what they do. But when we offer bird feeders, we're offering a bird feeder for other animals as well, right? So thinking about that, like you said, cover is very important for the smaller birds because usually the birds will detect the Cooper's hawk or the sharp-shinned hawk or whomever, whichever species is coming in to predate or looking for a tasty meal at your bird feeder. The smaller birds will detect them pretty easily, and oftentimes you'll hear blue jays mimicking the calls, and sometimes you'll notice. I notice when everybody freezes at my bird feeders, I start looking around for the raptor, right? And so being able to provide them some resources to escape is always a good thing. And so I don't know that there's much more to do. I will say that typically it happens so fast in my yard anyway. So there's not much I can do to control it. It's just part of bird feeding.
and they have it harder in some ways, the Raptors, really. I mean,
Yeah.
they gotta eat, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, because I've certainly talked to many irate you know, people feeding birds in their backyard, like, I got a raptor coming in my yard. I don't want it. But, they got to eat too. And it's, they'll move on eventually. Do you have a favorite moment in your backyard ever watching bird or your favorite
Oh my
species,
gosh.
Holly?
Well, I mean, I can't think of one moment because there are just so many, and I've really felt like throughout my life, birds have been wellness companions and they've helped me through some really tough times in my life. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. Right now, and I have to say, I have a strong affection for the eastern bluebirds in my yard. They are something that just fills my heart with so much joy every time I see them. I know that they're watching. If I walk out with mealworms to put in there, I have a little box for them, and also, I have the cup feeder, like you saw. They start making this call. It's really cute. It's like a purring call, and I really feel like they're watching me and they're excited when they see me come out, knowing that I'm going to feed them. So it's because I have this connection with them, and there's sort of this reciprocal relationship where I'm giving them something and they're giving me this joy and feelings of wellness in response. So that's my favorite. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I mean this picture here that I have in my backdrop, I don't know if everybody can see that. It's the Evening Grosbeaks at a special feeder that was made for me. And this picture is actually from a year. Again, it goes back to that kind of companion wellness aspect. I mean, in 19, or actually, no, it was 2001, 2002. My father was diagnosed with cancer, and I had this place out in the middle of nowhere that was kind of surrounded by state forest, and I didn't have a neighbor. It was like a half a mile each side of me, and I had every eastern finch in my yard that year, and I had a flock of evening grosbeaks, which they'll eat you out of a house at home. They're known as the grocery beak back in the day when they were a lot more common. But it was just, being able to look out and see. I had red poles, 150 that year. Again, I had a gazillion feeders and just a ton of finches, and it gave me something to kind of anchor my thoughts and positivity during a tough time in my life. As a lot of us will often kind of, I mean, even like I said with COVID, it's like, a lot of us, my brother Timmy, who, my brother David always kind of, once I kind of became, an ornithologist and got into it, he got into it pretty quickly. My brother Timmy didn't really join the ranks. And there's probably, you talk to any birder, they have this story. Almost all of us have a story of like the one person that finally got into putting a feeder up in their backyard during COVID. And my brother Timmy, and he still feeds now. And it's
Mhm.
nice to see, again, it just brings, joy to people. So, but yeah, the finches, evening grosbeaks in the backyard is hard to beat.
Oh,
I'm
I
a little
agree with you
biased
there.
though.
Yeah, well, I agree with you right there.
Yeah.
So if you have a question, drop into the chat. We have a couple more minutes. Oh, a question that I keep getting is about the AI uh,
Yeah.
with these smart feeders. So, is are they getting it correct? I know that I was looking through and noticed some errors, but one thing I love about BirdFeed is you can actually tell it's the wrong species. So we're helping the machine learn, and this is what's great about AI technology is that we are training the trainer, right? We can provide information and provide some feedback. So what are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, I've tested a number of these products out, and I mean, to me, again, I might be a little biased, but Bird Fees AI is as high as any's out there. In fact, I'd call it the best. With that said, no AI is going to be perfect. It just is not possible. I mean, anybody that has Merlin out there, I worked on that project for a long, long time. The Merlin Visual ID, I think, runs in like 90 percentile or something like that. I think the audio ID is a little bit lower than that. And that's just because, again, it comes down to sometimes, just like even sunlight blurring, the bird at your feeder can
Yeah.
cause the identification to be different because the sunlight's different.
Hmm.
So there's just a lot of things you're never going to get it to a perfect place. But that's okay. We just kind of, as long as we keep kind of making it smarter, and it comes down. Everybody gets, I know there's pluses and minuses of AI, and we all know what those are in a lot of ways, but we can help it learn. It's really only as good as what we're feeding, that's getting the idea from us. Essentially, it's crowdsourcing all that information, and that's how they make these kind of models to test the identification accuracy and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's incredible that I could be like across the state, at my mom's house, and get notifications that I have X at my bird feeders, my bird feeder, and actually see the video of it happening in real time, and I'm 3 hours away or 6 hours away or across the country. So it's pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, I love that connectivity that it provides. And I also like the security feature because some of these products also, like especially my bird bath, if somebody walks out, in my backyard, I can see that. So that's kind of cool too. Anyway.
Yeah, the Haiku box also is I see Rob mentions there's hearing devices or learning devices out there with that'll identify sound as well. And Haiku Box is one of those. It's actually another collaborative with the Cornell Lab and the bioacoustics department there at Cornell Lab. Um, but yeah, Haiku Box, you basically put up this device, and it basically will give you notifications on the birds it's identifying by sound in your backyard. So it's another kind of thing that has become part of the landscape that you can buy. There's all kinds of stuff you can buy. I mean, it used to be, we put baby monitors up so we could hear our birds in our backyard, but you can put up Haiku Box and you'll actually get a notification. My boss, Josh Stasek, also always sending me, "Hey, I got this in my backyard right now with, and Haiku Box is captured it." So yeah, there's a lot, the fact that all these things that you could put up in your yard just to enriching kind of your experience is pretty amazing. Who thought we'd be here, uh, 20 years ago or even 15 years ago? So,
Absolutely.
any other last minute? I know we're at the top of the hour here.
Well, we'll let if anybody has other questions, feel free to pop into the chat as I close out here. But I want to thank you both for joining us today. It was great information, helpful for me personally to help in my backyard. So thank you all for joining and attending and listening to Matt and Holly. And I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. Make sure that you follow WBFI on all the social media platforms to stay in the know of other upcoming webinars or events that we're hosting. And also that we have Project Wildbird to help promote the hobby of bird feeding. And so that's a little bit more focused on the hobby side of things and bird feeding. And so we'll encourage you to also follow Project Wildbird to be inspired and find joy in bird feeding. So from
And we'd like to thank
WBFI,
you as
we
well.
appreciate your support.
We'd like to thank WBFI and Bird Fee as well.
Yeah. Big
So
thanks
thanks,
to
everybody.